Hi, friends. Welcome to the second installment of our science fiction book club read along. This month, we are reading the book The Terraformers by Annalee Newitz. Just to catch you up on the format, the idea is that we'll read 5 or 6 pages here tonight, and I'll leave some room for discussion, throw out some questions at the end. And I'd like to see folks actively participate in robust discussion in the comments. But the goal is to get us all reading and excited about some of the great stuff that's coming out. So, with nothing further, starting chapter 2 of The Terraformers. L'Orange. Home is a bargain with nature, from the Environmental Rescue Team Handbook. Glancing at the position of the sun in the west, Destry calculated that they had a good chance of making it home before dinner leftovers. After she and Whistle had composted charter, they'd spent another 2 weeks in the field because an ERT geographer replied to her bug ticket with coordinates for the remote space vessel. The stench of decomposing metal alloy still stung in her nostrils. Whistle had flown all day, almost 720 clicks, from the mineral-rich mush that was once an atmosphere entry pod. Destry would need to return for more readings in a few months, but for now it seemed the ecosystem held its precarious balance. A few tiny ranger stations dotted the grassland, throwing symmetrical shadows from peaked roofs. She sent a greeting to each as they passed. Ranger Destry Thomas returning. Hello. Hello, Destry. Ranger Squad Marshalder here. Welcome back. It went on like that for many clicks as the sun sank, though Destry spent slightly more time talking to some rangers than others, depending on how much she liked them. At last they could see the compacted dirt road to L'Orange below, illuminated by long wavelength visible spectrum lamps whose deep red glow didn't attenuate the sky's darkness overhead. Whistle descended gradually before landing at a full gallop, slowing to a walk before the urban ecosystem embraced them. L'Orange's skyline was dominated by apartments, stacked in slowly twisting spirals, each floor angled a slightly different direction so that everyone's rooms could capture sunlight. Most of the densely packed city, however, was only a few stories tall. Market squares and courtyards were edged by barns and domos, long rectangular public buildings with arched roofs covered in mosses, clover, and shallow root herbs. She dismounted and walked alongside Whistle as they turned a corner and followed the main road downtown. Gardens were everywhere, sprouting in tufts from the wall pockets or sprawling for blocks alongside streets busy with pedestrians, bikes, and trucks. They crossed a low bridge over a stream ruddy with city lights, and Destry felt a twinge as she watched a family of hares drinking at its edge. At least the small mammals were safe here. Destry and Whistle followed the road north toward the ERT campus, where each had a bed. Paper lanterns strung overhead illuminated the broad sidewalk where a few evening shoppers considered the day's remaining wares: bruised fruits and vegetables, a slightly burned loaf of bread. 2 cat-sized drones hovered down on 8 rotors to land on Whistle's right and left antlers. They had smooth, X-shaped bodies with sensors spread like freckles along each axis, and they were small enough to use conventional flight rather than gravity mesh. "Long time no see," they said in unison. "The city misses every aeronaut." Though they had 2 bodies, Hellfire and Crisp shared a consciousness. It was therefore hard to say whether the drones were a plural or singular they. Whistle snorted and sent a public text. "Hi there, good to be back." The drones took off again, ignoring Destry. Whistle had a social life that he didn't tell her about, and she didn't ask. It was one of many nonverbal agreements they had that made their working relationship deeply amicable and pleasing. Their first stop was the ERT barn, where the moose lived with other mounts. At its wide door, Destry relieved him of her saddle before giving him a rub-down in the spots he couldn't reach. "Have a good night, pal," Destry said. He nudged her with his nose. "You too." The ERT domo for homonyms was at the end of a dirt path bordered by night-blooming primroses and mint, whose mingled scents sweetened the air. She had to duck through an arch in a whimsically pruned hedge whose contours were determined annually by the rangers in training. Right now, it was supposed to evoke the undulating body of a swimming placoderm, an homage to the Devonian armored fish who still roamed the seas. Ahead lay the Domo, its wide 3-story bulk packed with dorms, lounges, and the main dining hall. It was one of the few buildings on Sask E built with wood, carefully culled from nearby spruce and fir populations to promote a diversity of new growth. Its creamy outer walls were treated with a transparent polymer to protect it from weathering, and the high, rounded roof was wattle and daub. Double doors opened as Destry's face came into range, and she walked down the yellow-lit throat of the hallway with its colorful murals, handprints, and informational posters. No matter how many centuries she lived here, returning to this domo always filled Destry with a sense of accomplishment. She was an environmental rescue team ranger, and her home here was proof. Still, her position wasn't solid. Destry recalled what that pest sucker had said through the lips of his remote. It was strange to find an ERT ranger on a private planet like this one. Most of the planet's hominin population were workers made from standard templates, decanted and controlled by verdants. Technicians, engineers, and farmers who lived in L'Orange but spent most of the year dispatched to remote construction sites. There was no ambiguity in the law when it came to those workers. Verdants could use them however it wanted. But the ERT was a profoundly public institution with campuses on nearly every league world. They couldn't technically be owned by verdants or anyone. Destry wasn't sure what kind of twisted legal logic her boss Ronnie had deployed to establish an ERT campus here. The ancient order of environmental engineers and first responders traced their lineage all the way back to the farm revolutions that ended the Anthropocene on Earth and started the calendar system people still use today. According to the old handbook lore, the trickster squad, Sky, Beaver, Muskrat, and Waskejek, founded the Environmental Rescue Team 59,006 years ago. That's when the legendary heroes saved the world from the apocalyptic floods by inventing a new form of agriculture. The Great Bargain, they called it, a way to open communication with other life forms in order to manage the land more democratically. The ERT started with domesticated animals. Ungulates, birds, small mammals, model organisms like rats. And over the millennia since, rangers had invited more species into the Great Bargain as their opinions became necessary for land management. Ronnie had decided that the ERT should be involved in her terraforming project, and so she built one. Apparently, the Verdant's VP was a true believer in the Great Bargain, but she also wanted to make money on colonization. She couldn't resolve this contradiction, so the Sask ERT ran like a moose with overgrown hooves. They had access to a planet-wide network of sensor data, as well as the ERT handbook with its stories about ecosystem management. But the company's ban on off-world comms effectively shut them off from other ERT communities. As far as Destry could tell, no one knew about the rangers here in L'Orange. That was convenient for Ronnie. She could appease her ancestors by respecting ERT traditions, but also please the executives at Verdance by keeping everything and everyone on Sask E privately owned. A thick aroma of fried onion in the domo promised leftovers, and Destry sped up with anticipation. The dining hall was the biggest room on this floor, occupying the entire west side of the building. When she poked her head inside, the place was empty and mostly unlit, except for the one area where half a dozen junior rangers were eating a late meal together. Thankfully, there was still a heaping tray of pierogies and pickled mustard greens on the grab table. Loading her plate, Destry sank gratefully into her favorite corner chair and reveled in the luxury of eating food made by someone else. The dumplings were still warm, and she'd scored a few stuffed with spicy lentils, as well as potatoes and curried carrot. But there were always surprises, especially at late dinner. Destry smeared fried onion on what she thought was a potato pierogi, only to discover it was sweet cheese, and therefore making a terrible face when her best friend Nil appeared in the doorway and yelped her name. "Destry, you're back! Any news from the forest?" She swallowed with difficulty, stood, and gestured for him to join her. "Everything is in balance," she said, evoking the time-honored greeting to avoid mentioning all the out-of-balance shit she'd seen. The two embraced before sitting in companionable silence at the table together. When they were young, she and Nil were sometimes mistaken for each other. Both had thick black hair, shaggy and straight, which always hung in their eyes. Working in the sun, their skin tanned to a dark brown, and they bulked up with muscles rather than growing lean like their colleagues. Now, almost 400 years later, it was easy to tell them apart. Dustry's hair was a salt and pepper fuzz sticking up around her face, while Nils was still long and black. Dustry's work outside kept her face tan and her arms thick with muscle, while Nils' lab work had lightened his skin and given him a small, soft belly. Only their matching eyes remained unchanged. They were bright, clear blue of shallow coastal waters. When they were lucky enough to be in the same place at the same time, they were inseparable. Even when she was sick of humans, Dustry could tolerate Nil. Gulping a pile of pickled greens to wash the weird flavor out of her mouth, Dustry gripped his shoulders warmly. "What's been happening down here in the city, my friend?" "Everything's in balance," he replied noncommittedly. "I was just checking the bug tracker, and it looks like one of the big lava tubes at Spider Mountain collapsed. There's been some seismic activity, so it could be an eruption coming. I was thinking of getting off my lazy ass and doing some field work down there." He paused and looked hopefully at her. "Want to come?" Because Sask-E had no plate tectonics, volcanoes rarely erupted out of nowhere. They oozed magma for millions of years in the same locations, creating massive cone-shaped mountains. The two friends had dealt a lot with these formations, though for different reasons. Dustry investigated breakdowns in local ecosystems from toxins expelled during eruptions, and Nil tapped lava flows to create volcanic soils for forests he was irrigating. His offer was tempting. Still, she had been looking forward to sleeping in her own bed for a while, after 3 months in the bush, especially after that disturbing encounter with the remote. And if she was being honest, the tropical ecosystems near Spider Mountain weren't her favorite. She'd always preferred the prairies. "I don't know, Nil. I'm pretty exhausted." He looked mildly put out, then concerned. "Did something happen out there? I saw your bug report about the space vessel, but I didn't read it." Dustry repositioned one of the lentil pierogies on her plate, carefully piling it with onion and mustard greens. She chewed for a while as Nil waited patiently. It was another reason why they had remained friends. He was willing to wait through her hard-edged silences. "I didn't report this, but I had to kill a remote, a default male Homo sapiens." She forked the last bite of dinner into her mouth. "He was murdering small mammals and eating them. Never seen anything like it. I don't mind saying it was downright spooky." Nil looked disturbed. "I think a whole slew of crackpots are going to start coming to Sask-E now. Verdance just opened up bidding for plots." Like everyone in Larange, he blurred the syllables in the planet's name together, and Sask-E became Sask-E. The Verdance announcement was news to Dustry, but it did explain how the remote had found its way here. Verdance was probably spraying everyone in League space and beyond with ads for their latest artisanal terraforming creation, 10,000 years in the making. The real estate developer was known for indie projects like Sask-E, which was ripening into one of the few known Earth-like worlds in the League, and that made it an enticing outlier among the thousands of habitable planets that speculators were terraforming at any given time. Verdance was really leaning into its whole Earth Rebooted marketing pitch, too. Anyone who bought property on Sask-E would be required to live here in a Homo sapiens body, which was packaged with the real estate. That meant settling here was very expensive, which seemed to make buyers salivate. All right, so that's our reading for tonight. I'd love to hear what you guys are thinking so far. Obviously, now we've encountered a new environment. They're back at the home base. They're in a very interesting environment. Would love to hear people's thoughts and feelings about how this environment is set up for them. Some of the things we've learned about technology. Would also love any thoughts and reactions out there about recent or modern developments in things like sensing technology or environment creation that you think would be relevant. But looking forward to seeing what you guys think, and please post your comments and let's start a discussion. And then we will pick up next time with the first part of Chapter 3. So thanks for joining, and I will see you guys later. All right. Bye.